Martijn, welcome.
Thank you, Ylli.
We also have two of our closest colleagues, Chip Usher, Chip, welcome, and Ylber Bajraktari, two of the closest, probably experts that have followed this issue for many, many years on our team. So we will be discussing the events around and in Iran with them shortly. But we will be joined first by another friend of ours, special guest, Joel Rayburn, who served as a senior director for the Middle East on the National Security Council staff. And also he served as a special envoy for Syria from 2018 to 2021. At the top of the hour at 2 p.m., we will also have Eyal Hulata, our dear friend from Israel, who also served as a former head of the Israeli National Security Council, and he'll be joining us as well live.
All right. Well, thank you, Ylli. Before we dive in, I just wanted to flag for you all that we will be taking questions live. So please send us your take to our Signal handle. That's SCSP.250. We're live monitoring your questions, so please let us know your thoughts. That handle, again, on Signal is SCSP.250.
Excellent, Martijn. Joel, if you have you online, welcome. Good to have you.
Good to see you.
Joel, let's start with what's your take? Today we had an incredible, press conference first by the Secretary of War and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and then the President also delivered remarks. You have worked these issues for many, many years. What's your take?
Well, putting on my former hat as a military planner and campaign assessor, it looks to me like in terms of the operations, I would have said it's ahead of schedule. To be able to reduce the Iranian regime's command and control capabilities so quickly. And I mean, it's just essentially, it's about 60 hours, I think, into the operations, maybe a little bit less, to have had this much of an effect on the Iranian regime's military capabilities is quite impressive. So I think just in this military phase, I think we can back up from it a moment and say, the military confrontation aspect of this crisis is a foregone conclusion. The outcome is a foregone conclusion. The Iranian regime doesn't have the military capability to defend itself. It's already lost control of its airspace over its own capital. The Israeli Air Force, U.S. Air Force, are not able to fly freely over Tehran and probably just about anywhere else in Iran that they wish to. And so in military terms, that means it's sort of strategically game over. They also haven't been able to really do the kind of damage lashing out at the Israelis or at the Gulf states that I think the Iranian strategy relied upon being able to do for a variety of reasons. So I think it's not a fair military fight. This is not going to be an extended military confrontation where the Iranian regime continues to do damage. They're on the back foot, so it's just a matter of time. They adopted a strategy, though, of decentralizing the command of their missiles and drone strike capability. So you can see there are some probably autonomous commands there that had good stockpiles of those weapons with orders to say, if Tehran goes dark and you don't hear instructions from us anymore, just continue to work down your pre-approved target list. That seems to be happening, but that's not something that's going to happen just infinitely. That's an asset that's going to eventually they're going to run out of the ability to do that. So just in military terms, it's not a contest. Now, politically, it's a big question mark after that. Maybe we could talk about that a little later.
Questions. What do you think the impact on the region has been so far? Has anything surprised you? Has anything not surprised you so far?
Yeah, I think I was surprised by the same thing that the Arab Gulf states were surprised by, which that they got hit in the first round. From the first hours of the confrontation, they were hit in a way that I think they feared but had hoped wouldn't happen. The Iranians clearly adopted a strategy this time of not just focusing on the Israelis and on U.S. assets. They clearly had a strategy from the very first minutes of the war to inflict pain on the Gulf states in particular, even down to the Omanis, which the Omanis effectively had been an extension of Iranian diplomacy, and even they got hit with some sites in a way that I think angered the Gulf states and has has compelled the Gulf states to essentially join in the war on the side of the U.S. and Israel in a way that they had not planned to do. I think they had hoped just to sort of sit it out on the sidelines, being broadly sympathetic to the U.S. side here, but not wanting to expose themselves to a backlash from the Iranians. But the backlash came in the first minutes. So that's been a very strategically significant thing.
Martin, do you have any
Yeah,
questions?
absolutely. Joel, thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. I'm interested in your thoughts on the succession question, right? So Khamenei is dead. The IRGC command structure is severely degraded. So who's actually making the decisions in Tehran right now? And how is this succession mechanism working when the actual succession mechanism is under bombardment at this very moment?
Yeah, I think it's not going to work very well in the end, because the Iranian regime had a succession plan. They had a survivability plan in place, but they now have the enemy air force flying overhead. So any new leadership that emerges is going to be on the target list again. So it'll have to. I just don't see how it doesn't get to a point where there's not a remnant leadership that has to capitulate and say, okay, wait, President Trump, can we talk about this? Can we talk about those 4 demands you had of us before this whole thing kicked off? And I would be really surprised if there aren't already elements inside the regime, whether those are factions or political figures, that are reaching out on back channels along those lines to try to explore, okay, if we agree to the things that we didn't agree to at the negotiating table, can we call timeout on all this?
Chip, you want to ask Joel anything?
Joel, great to see you. Chip Usher here.
Chip, hi.
What is your evaluation of the remaining inventories of rockets and missiles that Iran may still have? I know precise figures are elusive to obtain, but in particular, how do you rate their ability to continue to threaten oil deliveries through the Strait of Hormuz?
Overall, so medium-range ballistic missiles, the ones that can range Israel, it seems like the Israelis are really concentrating on attriting that. And I saw the statement, the estimate from the Israeli chief of staff that they believe they've gotten those to a level under 200. It's so, I mean, that's something that's not going to last very long. They won't be able to really extend the pain. And as you know, Chip, it doesn't matter how many missiles you have; it's how many missile launchers you have, and that's a wasting asset. And it's under they're being hunted. The short-range ballistic missile capabilities and the anti-ship cruise missile capabilities; those are the ones that are more dangerous, both for firing across the Gulf and firing at shipping in the Gulf. Those it's yet unclear. We didn't know for sure how many launchers, short-range launchers they had, because those weren't used in the June confrontation because they can't range Israel. The estimates that open source estimates have always put that at around 100. So those will be attrited over time as well, but they can do a lot of damage because the shorter range missiles get to the target more quickly and are harder to intercept. So it remains a threat. I think the IRGC Navy seems like, as the president said in his remarks earlier, that's a focus. Taking out the IRGC Navy is now a focus of the campaign. I would not expect they would be able to do much then with their surface vessels and their submarines. But the anti-ship cruise missiles and the ability to affect shipping there, that's unclear. So if I were the coalition military target planners right now, that's what I would be looking at, is trying to neutralize that anti-ship cruise missile capability. But if we zoom back from the situation, I don't think the trend line is working in the direction of the Iranians having the ability to disrupt the Persian Gulf and shut down the Strait of Hormuz for a really extended period of time. Especially since they now over their cities, they don't have any effective air defense. So it's just the air forces here and the maritime forces can essentially attack those targets at their leisure, without the Iranians having much of an ability to fight back.
Ylber, maybe last question from you for Joel.
Yeah, Joel, great to see you. Thank you so much for your insights. Obviously, you've spent a tremendous amount of time professionally as a military and as a diplomat in this region. What does this mean for the region? What does Iran that's crippled militarily mean for the region? And then maybe if you can take a step back and put this in a broader strategic context, what does a weakened Iran mean for sort of the axis of disruptors? And particularly this action being in the aftermath of the action in Venezuela.
Yeah, I think it's huge on both counts. It's huge in the region. It's huge geopolitically. In the region, you know, the Iranian regime has exerted very significant political influence in the Arab world in particular because of the military strength of its proxies on the ground in the Levant, in Yemen, in Iraq. And while they still have, for the time being, reach into Iraq, it seems pretty clear they no longer have Lebanon. Syria is gone, was already gone for them. The Palestinian territory is already gone for them. Yemen, the Houthis seem to not want to have anything to do with this conflict. So the deep reach of the axis of resistance seems to really have been ended. And they can, as I say, they can reach into Iraq, but they can only do that locally. Their proxies in Iraq don't have a regional reach. And then if we zoom further out from it, an Iranian regime that no longer is able to sustain the kind of aggressive, destabilizing foreign policy that it's been doing, now it begins to be neutralized as a key member of that alliance of China, Russia, Iran, or the CRINCS coalition, which North Korea, Venezuela, and so on. So it seems like that coalition, that strategic coalition, is really reduced by several now, with the loss of Assad and Venezuela, and now the Iranian regime. It makes it, and that'll have a material impact on Russia, for example. The Iranian regime has been the supplier of drones and missiles to the war effort in Ukraine for the Russians. It's one of the main energy suppliers to Xi Jinping's China. So it's a real setback. If the Iranian regime now either is neutralized as a member of that alliance, or if there's some pending political arrangement where it flips and becomes more malleable to the United States and our allies, that's a real strategic setback, I think, for that adversarial alliance, the axis of revisionists.
Joel, thank you so much for the short notice to join us. As always, incredible insights. So thank you again, and we'll sure to call you back on our show to continue this conversation, since I'm sure this will continue for many, many weeks to come.
Okay. Good to be with you.
Thank you, Joel. Okay, gentlemen, before we continue with our show, I want to play the video from today's president's remarks, I think, about Iran, and then we can continue the conversation.
And we have, right from the beginning, we projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it whatever. Somebody said today, they said, oh, well, the president wants to do it really quickly. After that, he'll get bored. I don't get bored. There's nothing boring about this. Do you agree with that, Pete? I don't think there's anything, Mr. General. I think there's nothing boring about it. Somebody actually said from the media, I think he'll get bored after about a week or two. No, we don't get bored. I never get bored. If I got bored, I wouldn't be standing here right now. I guarantee you that, to go through what I had to go through.
We saw the president earlier, and then much earlier, Secretary of War and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs spoke from the Pentagon about the objectives, about the military campaign so far. And so what's your take, Martin, so far about how this is evolving? Over the weekend, we didn't have many senior admin officials really talking about the situation, except the president. And today we had, right off the bat, the secretary and then the chairman and then the president talking about the campaign so far.
Well, I, for one, was relieved to hear the clear statement of actual objectives after 48 hours of this campaign. But still, there does seem to be a bit of a moving target at times. It's not clear to me what exactly the ultimate end state is, because even Secretary Hegseth at one point said this isn't about regime change, but the regime has indeed changed. It's uncertain to me how far the administration actually wants to push on a complete transformation, to a true end of the Islamic Republic, and what that ultimately would look like.
That may be true, but one thing that I think the president did this morning with his remarks that sent a very clear and sort of different signal from what we've heard from past presidents is, I'm in it to win it, right? He is committed. The United States will not be easily deterred by casualties, and there's not a time limit. This is something that our adversaries have sort of counted on in past conflicts with the United States. And I think the president's in a very strong signal that we're not playing by those same set of rules. So he showed firm resolve.
I think another thing we're seeing is potentially the dawn of a new doctrine, which is a regime change by decapitation. So this is not something I think that we've practiced previously. I think when we sort of undertook regime change previously, we went for boots on the ground, complete destruction of the existing state, and then building a new one. I think from what we saw in Venezuela and potentially even in Syria beforehand, we're seeing a new doctrine really by this administration, which is try to force a regime change by decapitating the current cast of leadership. And then if a new one emerges and takes over and it's more manable, as Joe suggested, then work with them. If not, then kind of go to the next generation, which is, I think, something the Israelis did in Lebanon over the past year or so, which is go to the next level of leadership until you find one that's more ready to make compromise over your political objectives.
Yeah. Well, that'd be a huge historical development, right? I can't recall a single instance where you can introduce regime change without boots on the ground. So that in and of itself would be a remarkable achievement.
Well, there's, as Ylber was sort of alluding to, there's regime change, changing the entire system, replacing an entire system, and then there's a leadership change, finding new leaders, maybe more junior, less experienced, or leaders with a different approach or attitude, who are more willing to accept the U.S. position.
The one thing, I said it on Friday, and my impression since then is that Iranians have really failed to read the situation in Geneva. I think they really misunderstood the intent of this administration. I think they thought they will be able to strike a deal that was favorable to them with little changes from previous offers. And I don't think they understood that, this is the president that, took down their most famous general, Soleimani. That over the time, in the last couple of years, the general sentiment in America has really built against Iran because of what they were doing in Ukraine, in the neighborhood, their support for Hamas. So I really thought that they were really operating in a different reality when it came to these negotiations. Instead of coming with a more realistic picture, what they could get, I think they came with maximalist ambition to get a deal that they thought would be reflective of their previous deals. And I think that was a big failure on their part to understand that, our patience, I think, our read of the situation, the role Iran has played, not just regionally, which I think since October 7 has been much, much clearer, but also vis-a-vis Ukraine, their relationship with China and other, malign actors around the world, I think has really come to an end in Washington in particular, with how to deal with the regime in Tehran.
Yeah. And I would add, I think even at the tactical level, you saw a degree of hubris, right? That they would convene with the supreme leader and have their entire political military leadership in the morning, while the U.S. had amassed almost 40% of its operational air force on its borders. It seems crazy. The question, I think, for me is going forward, which is, will they wise up? Will they realize that odds are not in their favor, that the campaign is increasingly going to get painful for them? And will they have the flexibility to make a deal? Or will they drive their country to a point of to a breaking point? So I think that's remained to be seen.
Or will Tehran be able to exercise enough command and control? Right? We heard from Joel, there appears to be sort of a decentralized approach to these rocket and missile launches, cruise missile launches. probably according to some pre-conflict plan that they had devised, but local commanders perhaps are being allowed to make these decisions without checking with central authorities in Tehran. It's remarkable to me how broadly these attacks have gone. I expected there would be a retaliation. I didn't expect Iran to attack 9 of its neighbors, including Oman, which was brokering the talks originally. So, whether Iran can kind of get itself organized to strike a deal, reduce the level of violence, it may take a little while before we see that starting to gel.
We have a question on Signal from Dave from Arlington, Virginia. If you're Tehran, are you planning to go down fighting, or are you looking for political settlement?
Well, I think at this point, Tehran's strategy most likely would be try to drag this out as much as possible, right? To see if the political will in the United States starts eroding. But then there's also the issue of how long can the United States sustain this ops tempo, particularly when it comes to munition stockpiles. And we also have to think about the air defense capabilities in the region. Those are being expended at a pretty significant rate right now. It's been very successful, I think over 90% intercept rates by UAE, for example, but that cannot continue indefinitely either because there are constraints in missile production and air defense production.
Yeah. This regime's first instinct is always self-preservation, which would argue that they would favor some sort of political settlement that eventually that would ensure that they stay in power. But to your point, Ylli, I'm just not sure that they have that read of the situation, or that they will come to that conclusion. So they could end up overplaying their hand and bringing their own downfall in the process.
I agree with that, and I kind of go back to my previous remarks. Who are we dealing with? So the Supreme Leader, Khamenei, had ruled for 40 years. He had built a system in which he was the sole supreme authority. He is now gone. At least 50 other senior leaders have been killed. Others are in hiding, perhaps not in communication with their power bases or with the military. So I think for sure, Iran is changing. The foe that we were facing on the 27th of February is no more. What will emerge in the short term and the long term to replace it, I think, is very much a question. Some of that will be indeed dictated by the pace and scope of U.S. and Israeli action. Other leaders may be killed. Their ability to do things will be further reduced. But who actually emerges from this succession debate that has just started will be very important to watch. And I think it may be something that could occur quickly or it could be protracted.
Yeah. And I would like to also always remind audience that it was just, 2 months ago that they killed more than 30,000 people in less than 48 hours. I mean, this is a significant number of, this regime causing pain on its citizens. So I think the sentiment against the regime is probably high internally. It's just the opportunity has not emerged yet in how to channel that dissatisfaction. But again, 30,000 people, it's a big, significant number. I know we have a couple of minutes, so let's watch the statement from the chairman this morning in the Pentagon, and then we'll continue the conversation, and we'll have Eyal and Hulata joining us shortly.
As the Secretary laid out, our military objectives are clear. Our mission is to protect and defend ourselves, and together with our regional partners, prevent Iran from the ability to project power outside of its borders, and be ready for follow-on actions as appropriate. Across every domain, land, air, sea, cyber, the U.S. Joint Force delivered synchronized and layered effects designed to disrupt, degrade, deny, and destroy Iran's ability to conduct and sustain combat operations. On the U.S. side, this marked the culmination of months and in some cases years of deliberate planning and refinement against this particular target set. From precision strikes against key military infrastructure to persistent intelligence and targeting integration to the close coordination of the components across vast distances, this operation again demonstrated America's reach, readiness, and professionalism, and that of our joint united force.
Before we forget, we lost 4 U.S. servicemen in this operation. So our thoughts and prayers really go with the family of those soldiers and those wounded, in the operation. So we should never forget those. We have a question from YouTube. Ylber, I'd ask you to comment on the chairman's remarks, and then Chip, the question from YouTube is, do you really think this will spark more protests? Which is my point. Has it already? Ylber, chairman's comments?
Yeah, no,
One thing I would say is if there's one country that we have had a more exhaustive target set in the world, was probably this problem set that you both worked on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, Tehran is both geographically larger population relative to Iraq in the region, and certainly had incredible asymmetric capabilities that it has been building for many decades. But I thought the chairman really provided a very good overview of what has transpired in the lead up to, as well as over the course of the past 2+ days. And a few things that kind of caught my eyes. One is, as he said, there's no other military force that can act in such a synchronized and joint fashion as the U.S. military, and to project power across so many geographies at the same time. So I think that was a good reminder for the adversaries out there that really U.S. military does not have a peer when it comes to employment of joint effects. He also alluded to space and cyber effects. He said he couldn't go into those because they're classified, but I thought that was notable. The other thing that I thought was notable was the employment of the Lucas one-way drones that the U.S. military did. I think that was probably the first time the U.S. has operationally employed one-way drones in a military campaign. So that was pretty significant. And then the last thing I would say that's fairly unique about this campaign is the integration with the Israeli Defense Forces. So on several levels. One is the way the U.S. military and the Israeli Defense Forces, the way they appear to have divided the target sets, with the Israelis focusing on leadership targets and the U.S. military focusing on the military infrastructure. And then two, the up-tempo and the synergy between two is really remarkable. So in my mind, the question is how many of our other allies and partners could really operate at this high level of up-tempo with this incredible precision and with the intelligence insights that the IDF and
the technology. And the technology. Chip?
Yeah, the Lucas system is fascinating because it was based on an Iranian design, the Shahed 136. So now we're using it against them, which is rather ironic, I think. Look, I've just finished a 32-year career at CIA, half of which I was focused on Iran. I've worked very, very closely with the Mossad and with the IDF, both doing joint operational planning and conducting several joint operations. Israel's travel over the last 7 or 8 years has been remarkable. They didn't used to do joint warfare with any other country. They would sort of piecemeal, cooperate, seek specific requests from the United States or nearby allies. But this is a different scale. Ylber, you're absolutely right. This is an integration of two forces to great strategic effect. The question asked about sort of protests, I assume that it's focused on protests in Iran. There are some sympathetic protests around the region that also concern me in places like Pakistan. But looking specifically at the situation in Iran, I think there's an opportunity, right? The regime within the next few days will be without a Navy and Air Force. It will be without air defenses. It will be largely defanged. Now, whether the people of Iran choose or are able to rise up and depose the entirety of the regime is possible, but it's not a foregone conclusion. I wrote over the weekend a long analysis where I actually see several potential scenarios. That is one. a popular revolution that sort of wipes away the regime and replaces it with something else. But there's some other alternatives that I see as well, some of which are not quite as rosy.
Martin, anything from you?
Well, again, I think to underscore the general's comments, this was and continues to be a remarkable military and intelligence success. I completely agree with Ylber. I mean, the ability of the United States and Israel to conduct an operation like this, it's truly remarkable. But the question remains, what comes after, and that's.
General Kane said something very important in his remarks. He said that the objective that the military has is to remove Iran's ability to project force beyond its borders. That's a very clear, precise, I think, militarily attainable objective, different than political objectives, right? So I think we're still waiting to see where the Trump administration sort of draws the line. But from a military, just purely military perspective, it's attainable. As Joel was saying, it's ahead of schedule, and it's very specific.
Yeah. We're still waiting for Mr. Hulata to join, but let's talk a little bit about the broader implications, because I think in the last 6 to 8 weeks, I cannot see a bigger loser on the international geopolitical stage than Russia. First with what happened in Syria, then in Venezuela, and now around Iran. And so when you think about it, that in parallel we have negotiation between Ukraine, Russia, and United States, you also have upcoming president's visit to Beijing. And on Friday, we'll cover this more probably with David. But I think, you can see that these leaders have never been more isolated probably in terms of international alliances and partners. It sends a clear signal, but also it's another way. If you look at the statements from Moscow, they have never got to the point of supporting whether it was President Maduro or the regime in Tehran. So you can see clearly a much more isolated axis of disruptors with less friends around the world. And I think it gives the president and our country a much stronger position going into the next couple of weeks that will determine probably the U.S.-China, relationship for many, many years, and hopefully bring an end to the war in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the events of the past few months really underscore the lack of ability and capability that Russia has to do anything meaningful in terms of involvement. For China, it might be a little different. I think they probably would have the capability, but are choosing not to. And there might be some good strategic reasons for them not to get involved in this conflict in particular.
I'll just start with the military lens. Russia had sold to Venezuela air defense systems, radars, communication gear, none of which protected Maduro. Same thing in Iran, S-300s, radars, other defensive systems completely blown past by the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Navy in recent days. China too. China was selling anti-ship cruise missile capability to Iran. So I think it's showing to the world, particularly in Moscow, Beijing, sort of the effectiveness, the superiority of U.S. military equipment, doctrine, and the joint force, as Joe Kane was alluding to. On China, half their oil imports flow through the Strait of Hormuz. So I think there's actually a play for President Trump as he approaches that summit meeting in Beijing to reach out to Beijing, to get them to weigh in with whoever emerges to replace Khamenei and take control of the regime, to use its influence to bring calm to the situation and get them to compromise.
Yeah. I think in my mind, there are sort of two issues. One is kind of the days of cheap oil for China coming to an end, obviously with Venezuela now in a different place, and Iran probably and potentially in a different space. I think if I was a PLA planner, it would make me nervous that I have to worry now not just about Strait of Malacca, but also Strait of Hormuz going forward. The other thing is it reminds me of 2017, which is when President Trump was hosting Xi Jinping in Florida for their first bilateral meeting, and over the course of a dinner, leaned forward and whispered in his ear that he had just bombed Bashar al-Assad, and which left Xi kind of astounded. So I think President has a very strong hand to play going into his summit in April, and I think Beijing will take notice of this.
Thank you. I know our team is trying to reach Mr. Hulata. I think, if not possible today, I think we'll try to get Mr. Hulata on our next show. I want to thank Martijn, Chip, and Ylber, and our entire team for really surging to produce this live show today. I think it's such an important topic, and we will continue to monitor this. We will continue to have you guys on the live show. But that's it for today. Martijn, anything from you?
No, obviously we'll have a lot to pay attention to the coming days, but as always, SCSP will be right there to let you know everything you need to know.
Thank you for watching. As always, please like, subscribe, and follow us across all the platforms on LinkedIn right now, Instagram, I think we're on YouTube, and Substack. Thank you, and until next time, have a good one.